Okay, so one more time, let's remember what we're doing. Sosa is trying to understand the relation between epistemic coherence and intellectual virtue. That's the game. We're trying to understand the connection between those two things. And what we've seen is that if we want to say that coherence can can play a justificatory role, it's a certain type of coherence. It's this reflective coherence from a particular perspective. And by reflective, we mean it has to include certain beliefs about what you believe. Okay, so now let's have a look at what happens next. Sosa sort of presents the two pictures of justification that are on the table right now. The first picture of justification is that, look, what makes something justified is that it's reliable. And the alternative is that it's not reliability that's fundamental, but what's essentially fundamental is coherence. Okay, and these two things seem like they're just straightforwardly at odds with each other. And Sosa wants to investigate kind of like how they play together. That is coherence reliable, or is reliability coherent? Which of these two things sort of comes first? And that's what we're going to be investigating. And to do so, he has this like very interesting thought experiment. He examines a world that sort of is like pretty irregular. Like there's not a lot in the way of laws of nature. There's not a lot in the way of like patterns to how things sort of hook up to each other. There's just enough to allow survival of at least one knower. One. We don't need to know anything more. So we can imagine this like creature navigating this world, and there's just no real laws for how things connect to each other. And what Sosa points out is like, look, in that world, coherence adds nothing to the likelihood of having truth, because the world just isn't very coherent, right? It's sort of like, who knows what's going on? And now he asks, like, so how plausible is it to insist that even in that kind of world, knowledge is aided by having these big coherent webs? And he's like, that just doesn't seem very plausible. The world isn't very coherent in that, like that particular world isn't very coherent. Having a coherent worldview is this sort of problematic thing. And so he says, this suggests that coherence has derivative and not fundamental status as a source of cognitive justification. It justifies in this particular world that we do in fact live in, or at least we hope it does. But coherence justifies in this particular world because it is a reliable way to get to the truth, not just in virtue of being coherence. Okay, he wants to flesh this out a little bit more. And so he goes on to talk about these two notions of aptness and ostensible validation. So before I talk about them, take a moment, go check them out.